I recognize the Premier.
Very much. Thanks very much, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate the chance to enter the debate on the speech from the throne, Mr. Speaker, and I want to, as I do, acknowledge the supports at home every chance I can. I guess at the beginning of this session, and this is the first formal opportunity I have to acknowledge my family, Tammy and Megan and Coulter, actually, who are busy with their studies at the University of Saskatchewan now, and Faith, who is now in grade 10 in high school. To all of our other family and supports, my folks and Tammy's, and to our the constituency support we have that are both part of our constituency office in Swift Current and also our own constituency executive, the political supports that we have back home. I want to thank them and acknowledge them for enabling me, allowing me to be able to have this great honour of being first and foremost the MLA for Swift Current, and then also able to assume some other duties. Mr. Speaker, I think those of us who follow politics for some time, we're very familiar with the refrain from those who review speeches from the throne, those who are pundits, those in the media, and that refrain is basically that they are very vague, that they are general, and sometimes they might outline a vision, but by and large they're very general documents without a lot of specifics. Mr. Speaker, it's interesting to note that one of the reviews of this particular speech from the throne, that's the subject of debate here this afternoon, from a daily paper here in the province, was actually quite the opposite. It was actually a bit of a criticism. I should say they were acknowledging the fact that there was a lot of specificity in this particular speech from the throne. There were a lot of specifics in the speech from the throne that we're debating and that my friend, the Leader of the Opposition, is deriding and ruling out of hand. Mr. Speaker, they did note, by the way, that they'd like to see more vision. So that was interesting. There was an editorial that said lots of specifics but no vision. Mr. Speaker, it's important to note that the speech from the throne flows from the growth plan that we announced well over a year ago now. Mr. Speaker, our government has always been informed by some overarching goals, some of them around population, and more on that in a moment, some of them around just general other metrics that speak to economic growth. We have always been informed by those goals as a government as we've implemented a growth plan. Our growth plan has 6 very clear principles that we can review. It always has. These have been unchanging. They were reaffirmed in the growth plan announcement about a year ago, and so was the vision for the province. The vision for the province in the growth plan is that we would be 1.2 million people by 2020. The vision for the province is captured in some very specific goals around improving grade 12 completion in the province, leading the country, in fact, by 2020 in grade 12 completion, that we would increase completion of grade 12 by First Nations and Métis students by 50% by that same period, Mr. Speaker. There were specific goals in health care, and the list went on in the growth plan. That was the vision for the province. The speech from the throne, Mr. Speaker, follows on that. It's ordered on that, on the vision, on that basis. It laid out many of the specific measures this government will take to achieve the vision outlined in the growth plan, to achieve the objectives of the growth plan. So, Mr. Speaker, I think that's why some of those who were reviewing the speech from the throne noted that there was a lot of specifics in it, and there are. For example, in the speech from the throne is the $10 million Urgent Issues Action Fund in terms of long-term care, in terms of care for seniors, as well as a commitment to move forward with more home care, Mr. Speaker, expanding pilot programs to Saskatoon and Prince Albert, beyond what we've already done, a $2 million investment in Regina, and to contemplate long-term answers for seniors care, for long-term care in the Saskatchewan. But real specifics, actual numbers, actual objectives, actual measures and programs, not words, not sort of these platitudes, but specifics in the speech from the throne that would help us achieve the vision and the goals of the growth plan. I note, Mr. Speaker, for example, the goals remain around 3 more collaborative emergency centres. These are exciting new emergency centres, one that are going to open those 3 places, and we know they're going to work because one's already been deployed and opened in Maidstone and welcomed there. We're moving now to, 4, Shaunavon, Spiritwood, Waka, and Kenora as well. Mr. Speaker, we are launching a pilot around hotspotting to relieve emergency rooms across the province, Mr. Speaker. Some very specific ideas on that. We're bringing back house calls, Mr. Speaker, for seniors who need them. The Leader of the Opposition said, well, we've always been doing it, and he was wrong on that count. He's been wrong on a number of things, Mr. Speaker, but he was wrong on that. We've had in the province certainly the ability and the fact that doctors will go to long-term care facilities, and that would constitute, I think, the house calls the Leader of the Opposition is referring to. What we haven't had, although in the province, is what they're doing at Mount Sinai Hospital in Toronto. And again, I think my honourable friend, the Leader of the Opposition, is a thoughtful individual. I know he was involved in the SMA. I think he's very interested in policy. So I urge him to look fully at the ideas presented here before he launches into a criticism. For example, 50 minutes to decide that the model for 9 new schools, one in his riding, was the wrong model. But on the issue of health care, the same is true. We are not doing the kind of home care, the kind of house calls that we will be doing, pioneered by Mount Sinai, Mr. Speaker, where, as a result of visits even to emergency rooms, seniors are identified who are candidates for house calls by doctors, by nurse practitioners, so that we can again prevent the overuse of emergency centers, but also, Mr. Speaker, that we would be able to improve on a proactive basis the health of seniors who are receiving health calls. So that's a very specific announcement that's part of the throne speech and that we're going to be working on. Mr. Speaker, the Student First Initiative in education also announced in the speech from the throne, and the specifics around that have been clarified. It was interesting. We had a good discussion on education here in this Assembly with the Leader of the Opposition. We've been very clear about things that we're going to move forward with, things that we are pausing on, Mr. Speaker, in terms of change. We've heard from teachers there has frankly been too much change, and we've responded by pausing the province-wide approach to the standards-based methods we were using, but continuing with the proven standards-based initiatives that are happening in places like Chinook School Division, for example, continuing with the successful early years evaluation and the Tell Them From Me surveys, Mr. Speaker. In addition to that, the speech from the throne mentions new bandwidth issues in our schools. We're investing in schools for the first time in a very long time to ensure that all the capital they have, all of those computers actually can work because there's bandwidth, and we're appreciative to SaskTel for that effort. Mr. Speaker, we've also announced 18 schools, actually 9 joint use schools around the province. And so specifics in the speech from the throne that respond to education needs, not just in terms of capital, but in terms of operating. Mr. Speaker, we've seen year over year in budgets, again, counter to what people might hear from the Leader of the Opposition, counter to what the NDP are saying, we've seen significant increases year after year after year, both the operating side and the capital side, for new schools. And notwithstanding the fact that I think we built about 20 new schools under our government, and well over, if you take a look at small capital improvements, over a couple of hundred of those over the years, and a number of major renovations to schools, Mr. Speaker, notwithstanding all of that, the Leader of the Opposition, in his capacity as the member for Massey Place, Saskatoon Massey Place, has done his duty on behalf of his constituents. He stood up in his place and said, we need a school. And by the way, the MLA for Saskatoon Southeast said Stonebridge needs a school. And MLAs for Regina have pointed to neighbourhoods, one in Harbour Landing, they said this is a growing area, we need a school. To the point where the number of new schools needed got upwards of 18 or more, frankly more, because there's rural schools that will need to be done, and we're going to be there for those in the future. So, Mr. Speaker, I was surprised when not only when the Leader of the Opposition declined the chance to attend the announcement, when the Minister of Education invited him right into his constituency. 54 times he had took to his feet in the Legislative Assembly and said to the government of the day, to our government, we need a school in Hampton Village. We need a school in Hampton Village. We need a public school. There needs to be a separate school in Hampton Village, in my constituency. Petition after petition after petition. So, Mr. Speaker, I was surprised when he declined even to come to the announcement. I think he knew we were going to be announcing that school in his constituency. I was even more surprised that he, with the advice of the Deputy Leader, who is the financial guru over on the other side of the House, the Deputy Leader took all of 50 minutes. 50 minutes. Wow. The country's been debating and improving P3 since about 1990. Getting better with every iteration, getting better with every generation in terms of transparency, in terms of timeliness, in terms of the investment required. We've taken a long time as a country to get these right. We as a government have thought about P3s and their application since we were first elected in 2007. In fact, the finance minister, then education minister, was quite candid. He went across the country and looked at some of the examples that members opposite point to and said, I'm not sure these are quite ready yet. That's what he said. Work was continuing right across the country, Mr. Speaker, and over the years that have intervened, we've seen Alberta go ahead with a number of schools, Mr. Speaker, 3 different phases, and save $240 million and get the projects done on time. Now, so given that history of P3s, that history right across the country, that literally stretches back to 1990, when I bet the deputy leader might have still been in high school. I'm not sure of his age. Mr. Speaker, given that span of time and the development of P3s as a model and the improvement of P3s as a model, it took the NDP and their financial guru 50 minutes to declare their opposition to these schools. Shameful. And they're opposed to all of them. Mr. Speaker, you cannot have your cake and eat it too in this legislature. A good in terms of saying, well, we want the schools, but we don't want it this way. It's one or the other. They can agree to work together with the government to make sure that we learn from all of the examples, and we will, Mr. Speaker, across the country, or they can oppose it, and they've chose to oppose it. We're going to let their constituents know. Because, I'm sure they let their I'm sure the Leader of the Opposition told everyone back in Massey Place, I stood up in the legislature again today. I fought for a new school here in Hampton Village. I bet you every time he did that, he might have sent a few letters out saying, look what I've done. Mr. Speaker, the real test then for all of us is what is our response when that action is taken, even if it's taken by the other side of this assembly. I remember, Mr. Speaker, standing in my place day after day during petitions, we did them a little differently back then, as you might remember, Mr. Speaker, asking the NDP government for a new hospital in Swift Current. Our hospital had been built, I think, in the late 1940s, and there was black mold and asbestos, and it wasn't meeting the needs of the region as a regional hospital, or certainly of the city of Swift Current, and so I stood every day with petitions, thousands of petitions, Mr. Speaker, representing thousands of petitioners. And then one day, and I'm grateful to the member for Lakeview's here, because he was the Minister of Health at the time. Then one day, the new Democratic Party government announced approval for funding and construction of a brand new hospital for Swift Current. Mr. Speaker, what I did as an MLA was took my place in the Assembly. I stated a few concerns that I was hearing from constituents in terms of the number of beds that were going to be in the new facility. Really, that was really the only major concern. But then I have the answer here. I said to the then minister, the current member for Lakeview, the current associate health critic, I think there's 3 health critics over there, I said, thank you. On behalf of the people of Swift Current, it's my job to ask you for these investments as an MLA, to make the case for this new hospital, and then when you respond, Government of Saskatchewan, whatever your political stripe, whatever the differences between us, it's then my job to say thank you on behalf of the people of Swift Current. And may I say respectfully, Mr. Speaker, if that's our job on this side as individual members, that's also their job on that side of the House when we're building schools in Regina, when we're building schools in Saskatoon. That's just kind of the common decency I think we want in the Assembly. You could state concerns, certainly, but you could acknowledge when the right thing's done, as the member for Elphinstone did just yesterday, when the Minister of SaskTel stood up and said we're building cell towers in northern Saskatchewan. Why is it that the member for Elphinstone is able to do that, but his leader, who I would argue should set an example, is unable to simply say, thanks for this commitment. We have a few concerns, but we appreciate the fact the government is moving forward on something that we've asked for. Mr. Speaker, there are a number of other issues and specific issues around the Student First initiative that we could talk a little bit about that are in the speech from the throne. It's true as well in terms of infrastructure in a general way and highways, Mr. Speaker. We've talked about some very specific action we'll take as a result of the work of the Committee on Traffic Safety. Mr. Speaker, that was referenced in the speech from the throne. The work of the committee itself was pretty specific. Specific action by a government responding to concerns of Saskatchewan people with respect to traffic safety. Mr. Speaker, it is also true that the speech from the throne was pretty specific about reacting to the good work of the member for Saskatoon Fairview on the issue of bullying in the province of Saskatchewan, and soon and very soon you'll see the government come forward with some very specific actions from the excellent work that the member for Fairview has done in broad consultations across the province. Mr. Speaker, in the speech from the throne, there was a lot of specificity around competitiveness because, again, there's goals in that growth plan. That vision document, that's the growth plan. There were goals around the fact that we're going to need thousands of more workers by 2020. We need to start training them now, and so there are 1,000 additional training spaces referenced in the speech from the throne, 700 of them for adult basic education. Many of those will be on reserve. Mr. Speaker, gone are the days when this government will wait for the federal government to do the right thing in terms of training on reserve. We're not going to take over all their jurisdiction. The taxpayers here simply can't afford it. But, Mr. Speaker, we're going to pick our spots. And adult basic education is one of those spots where we will go on reserve. In fact, I think the member for Coronation Park helps deliver some of this programming on reserve. We will go on reserve and provide adult basic education. We have determined, and we let the province know in the growth plan, that there is a waiting list for adult basic education. That's wrong, we think. If somebody wants that basic education to take the first step to engagement in the economy, or perhaps lead them to the next step in engagement in the economy, any step towards engagement in the economy, then you bet a role for government is to provide that training, and there'll be 700 new adult basic education seats that are referenced in the speech from the throne, as there are 300 new apprenticeship seats. Mr. Speaker, you will know that industry is telling us we still need more apprentices. We've done a lot in the government in terms of responding to employers on the ratio question, so we can see these new trained employees deployed more quickly. And, Mr. Speaker, we're actually, in addition to all of that, going to be adding training seats as well. Mr. Speaker, the speech from the throne also talked about something, and we had a bit of a debate about it in question period, on the innovation side of our growth plan with respect to Boundary Dam. There is a clean coal project there, Mr. Speaker. It is the world's only post-combustion clean coal project that exists, frankly. It's going to be live. It'll be commissioned in the spring. They're testing it already this fall, but here's what we know. We know the technology works. We know, Mr. Speaker, that it captures about 90% of carbon. We know that oil companies have purchased every bit of CO2 it'll produce. It'll produce 1 million tons a year, by the way, Mr. Speaker. All of it purchased by oil companies, used for enhanced oil recovery, meaning they don't have to drill new holes, meaning it reanimates existing oil assets. Then it's stored geologically in southeastern Saskatchewan, where we've been doing that successfully for a very long time, in part because of a project that the New Democrats started. When we came to government, the clean coal project had been completely shelved. We worked with the federal government. We got funding for it, about $240 million. We added to that funding about $1.1 billion. Mr. Speaker, it was strange in question period. The Leader of the Opposition kept saying, where's the action on the environment? Well, Mr. Speaker, how about $1.1 billion worth of action on one project alone? The largest per capita investment in CO2 mitigation. So we gave him that answer, but he just asked it again. It's interesting, Mr. Speaker. It's entertaining. But, you know, the good news on our side is the answers don't change, because the answers reflect a record on all of these files. The answers reflect the speech from the throne, informed by a broader vision in the growth plan that has specifics. The actions reflect a government that's not afraid to set objectives in healthcare or in education or for the economy, and to be held accountable for those objectives, Mr. Speaker. We welcome the debate. But you know, Mr. Speaker, in order for there to be an actual debate, when one side presents their specific plans for the future, or even their broad goals, in order for there to be a real debate, the other side generally presents its specifics and its goals.
More than eggs and baskets.
Mr. Speaker, there is a role for opposition to criticize. We did that in opposition. There is a role for opposition to hold the government accountable. But as you get further into the election cycle, there is an additional role incumbent upon all of us in this Assembly, including the opposition, that they would also put forward their plan. Not platitudes, not to say we're in favour of more eggs and more baskets, and not to say we're in favour of sustainability and awesomeness and good, Mr. Speaker, but actual specifics. People will need to make a choice in the next election. And I don't think right now they have a choice. By the way, Mr. Speaker, when the opposition is holding any government accountable, it's also incumbent that when they make a case or an accusation, that they be accurate.
That's great.
That they actually come with the entire truth. We've seen a few examples of it lately in this House, Mr. Speaker, where that has not been the case. I remember with the great outrage when the Leader of the Opposition had a memo in his hand that had gone into the RQHR, the health region around Regina, informing frontline staff that in certain situations, staffing shortages, certain functions of care might have to take a bit of a back seat if there was a shortage. And there was some things like bathing on there, some issues I'm sure that would be serious were those emergencies to arise, but they needed a contingency plan in the event that there was one. And I remember the Leader of the Opposition getting very angry about this. That how could this happen under the Minister of Health's watch? How could this happen under this government? Mr. Speaker, he would have known full well, I'm sure, as a former researcher for the SMA, for the Saskatchewan Medical Association, and we produced the memo, by the way, to back this up, that this has been standard practice in the province of Saskatchewan under different governments, under their government and under ours, because health regions need contingency plans. And I note for the record, Mr. Speaker, today that when we read that memo back from 2004 that said exactly the same thing, he changed the subject. He moved on to another question. Mr. Speaker, yesterday in the Assembly, the Deputy Leader, the financial guru for the New Democrats, was talking about bullying. There's two ways you can, I think you can harm your credibility as a political party. One is to just kind of miss some of all of the facts. One is to perhaps use something other than the facts. I'm being careful here, Mr. Speaker. And another is to take people out of context. I remember, Mr. Speaker, not very long ago in the life of politics in the province where our New Democratic friends monitored an interview of mine and took the tape away, and then they spliced the tape. I didn't say anything in the tape that would be advantageous to them, but what they could do, I guess, they thought is, well, we'll just splice the tape, put words together so that it reflects something that he actually never said, didn't even come close to saying, and then we'll make an ad, out of it. Well, the Deputy Leader was a big supporter of the Leader of the Opposition, who was behind this. Mr. Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition was involved in writing the platform document for the NDP, was involved in the political life of that particular opposition. That's what they did then. Have they changed? Did they learn? Because I think they were widely criticized for that tape.
Well for them.
Well, Mr. Speaker, just yesterday in the Legislative Assembly, the Deputy Leader, on the issue of bullying, by the way, which is very much germane to the debate, it's part of the speech from the throne, was asking the Minister of Education a question, and he was referencing the fact that the member for Fairview that's been working on bullying had said some certain things about when we could report out and take some action with respect to bullying. And so, Mr. Speaker, I could read it all into the record, except I will tell you that we have now checked the actual tape, checked the full quote, and Mr. Speaker, the Deputy Leader of the Opposition took the member completely out of context. He quoted her as follows.
Not surprising.
It's really hard to keep my mouth shut when it comes to that because I don't want to jump the gun and let the cat out of the bag. And he just ended the quote there. And then he went to a question of the minister and said, this is all ready, this is all staged, why haven't you released it? The rest of the quote, Mr. Speaker, is that the member said, and he would have access to this, is until we actually, we do as much due diligence as we need to do. Mr. Speaker, that's a pretty important part of the quote from the member, who's been working very diligently, going across this province, canvassing what other provinces are doing to deal with bullying, Mr. Speaker, as earnest an effort as you will find by any member, regardless of politics. So she says in an interview, I'd really like to tell the province some things now, but we're not quite ready. We haven't done all the homework, except the last part he leaves out because it doesn't fit his political purposes, Mr. Speaker. I don't think they've learned anything from politics in the last couple of years in this province. Mr. Speaker, in the speech from the in the debate around the speech from the throne,
is Wayne your QP advisor?
We've heard just very recently. We've heard today another call for a smart growth plan from the New Democrats, from the Leader of the Opposition. And I just want to conclude here because this speech from the throne is very much about our growth plan, and more specifically, it's about our specifics on how we're going to achieve our growth plan. We have 6 components. Mr. Speaker, we know that it's employers that are creating the wealth of this province. We know that the people of Saskatchewan and external factors are the driving force behind our growth, but governments can help or hurt that growth, and so we've laid out a plan that we think will help it. Mr. Speaker, dealing with the labour shortage is at the top of the list. Infrastructure is at the top of the list, if I can read these into the record. Competitiveness, we've dealt with that, and that means competitive taxes. That means labour legislation that's balanced, by the way, and competitive with other jurisdictions. Mr. Speaker, we're working on that. It means a focus on our strengths, which include natural resources and agriculture, by the way. I heard the Leader of the Opposition just speak on the speech from the throne. It's a chance to talk a lot about what's right in the or wrong, whatever really he wants to talk about. And I don't think, members, I don't think there was one word breathed by the Leader of the Opposition on agriculture. Mr. Speaker, last year we broke our export records in this province. 32 billion in exports. We exceeded British Columbia. A third of those exports are from agriculture. This province is leading the world, leading the way in the production of, you name it, pulses, cereals, oil seeds, Mr. Speaker, the canola oil itself. Mr. Speaker, second largest beef herd in the country. One of the rock stars, if I can use that term, of our economy is agriculture. And, you know, Mr. Speaker, the speech from the throne recognized that. The speech from the throne took steps to provide a voluntary livestock insurance program, has announced that. Another specific action. Mr. Speaker, I think the people of this province know that, that as long as members on this side of the House have the chance to serve on this side of the House, we will never, ever forget the importance of agriculture. More than that, we understand that it is very much at the heart of the Saskatchewan advantage, Mr. Speaker. The 5th component of our plan is an innovation agenda, and the 6th is fiscal responsibility, balanced budgets. So there you have it. That's our growth plan. And we can talk about specific measures under each of those, some of them mentioned in the speech from the throne. Again, the NDP say they don't like that plan. They've said it in the debate today. They said they would have a smart growth plan. Fair enough. What is it? Mr. Speaker, this is a very important question. I remember when I had the honor of becoming Leader of the Opposition in March of 2004. Mr. Speaker, we knew we had to take immediate steps to respond to what had happened in the last election because people had sent our party a message. And so, Mr. Speaker, we undertook a broad and sweeping review of all of our policy. I said, look, we're going to actually go beyond the membership of the party and talk to academics, talk to others, talk to people in business, talk to Labour, and develop new policies. Mr. Speaker, we also presented an economic paper for the province called The Promise of Saskatchewan. And then that fall, the fall of 2004, we met as a convention, as a party. We took the input from not just party members, but all those we had consultations with across the province. We actually threw out all of the existing policies. Some of it was going to come back, we knew that, but we wanted to start with a clean slate, and we rebuilt the policy of the party. And from that, then, we proposed a platform in the last election. And from that, we kept the promises we've made, and we've subsequently offered another platform. But, Mr. Speaker, we did all of that in that early part in terms of development of brand new policy between March and the end of November. Mr. Speaker.
In the same year.
In the same year, Mr. Speaker. In the same year.
Guess what?
Well, my friend across the way has got half of it right. He's wiped out all the NDP policy. If you go to their website and look for policy, Mr. Speaker, you cannot find any policy. We have a political party in the province of Saskatchewan that wants to present itself as a credible alternative to the government, says we need a smart growth plan, doesn't like this, that, and the other thing, and you go to their website and say, well, I wonder what these guys think about that. Then click on policy, and there is nothing there. How is that possible? Really? I swear. Really? What we get, though, Mr. Speaker, and we just heard it in the Assembly today, is things from the Leader of the Opposition that he says we need a smart growth plan. Whatever that is. I think that if people thought the NDP were now in favour of smart growth plans, that would explain a lot about what they did in the 1990s, Mr. Speaker. But he says, well, he gave us a few more details today. He said a smart growth plan is sustainable. I think everybody can understand now what he means. It's sustainable, and that it's more diversified. Mr. Speaker. Then he went on to say, well, one financial writer was critical of the economic policies of the government and said we were going off in all directions. I would point out for my honourable friend that same business writer, Mr. Speaker, wrote after we released our growth plan that our plan was, quote, pragmatic and visionary, ambitious and achievable.
Yeah. Pretty nice word.
Yeah. So, Mr. Speaker, but Mr. Speaker, my point is not what any one financial commentator might say. My point is this to our friends opposite. We're waiting. If the NDP want to engage in a meaningful debate, if they want to share with us what a smart growth plan would be, if they want to share with us what their targets are in healthcare, how many healthcare workers should be there, what their goals are in education, and then not maybe even right now, we'll give them some dispensation, but as we get closer to the election, maybe cost it out and find out are they still in favour of balanced budgets or not. When they have that level of detail, even some more generalities, then we can have a debate, Mr. Speaker. As for the government, we can only control what we do on this side of the House, and so we make some commitments to the people of the province of Saskatchewan. We're going to work hard every single day to earn the mandate that they gave to us, Mr. Speaker, in 2011. We're going to keep the promises that we made, Mr. Speaker. We're going to be focused on growth as long as we have a chance to be on your right side. We will be focused on growth and those 6 components that we think will help sustain and facilitate further growth. And finally, Mr. Speaker, we're going to work very hard to deal with the challenges of growth. We know they're there. They're there in education. They're there in healthcare. They're there in infrastructure. We have specific ways and ideas to do that, Mr. Speaker. Some of them traditional, some of them like P3s that are innovative. But Mr. Speaker, make no mistake. Make no mistake. This side of the House, in terms of those particular priorities, will always prefer the challenges of growth to the challenges that faced this province under those long years of NDP government, which were the challenges of decline. Mr. Speaker, when actual members of the government would take to their feet, NDP government, and basically, Mr. Speaker, dismiss the fact that this province could even grow at the national average. When someone who I think at the time might have been the finance minister would say about our goals on this side to be 1.1 million people, would call them farcical, would say that they fly in the face of reality. Mr. Speaker, whatever happens as a government, we're going to make mistakes going forward, but we will never make the mistake of underestimating this province or its people. Mr. Speaker. We will continue to believe that growth can be sustained, that our best days are always ahead of us, Mr. Speaker. We understand it'll take work to accommodate that growth, but the people of this province have a solemn commitment in the speech from the throne and in the actions, in the words and the deeds of this government that we do believe in this province. Not just today, but for the future. We do believe it can lead the country as it is today, not just today, but into the future, Mr. Speaker. That's our commitment to them. That's what's reflected in the speech from the throne. That's why I'll be voting for it later today.